Hi folks, this is Max Nielsen-Pincus with ESM 335. This is a video tutorial on using COUNTIF and COUNTIFs for assignment 2. So for assignment 2 we're using the Interior NW Landowner Survey dataset that I have open here. You can see we're on the README tab. If you go to the second tab here, metadata, you'll see all the different fields that are in the data as well as their descriptions. And over on the right, the lookup tables where you can find how the data is coded, or the direct example of how it's coded. If we go to the next tab, we see lookup tables. Here's numerically how the data is coded. And if we go to the next, well, let's just jump 2 sheets over, we'll see Interior NW Landowner data. You can see we're at the bottom of the data set here. And I've set up a little table here that we'll get to in a moment. Let's look at the assignment real quick. So if we jump to the assignment, we just go to question 1 here, you can see it asks for the average area of land by primary use for respondents to the Interior NW Landowner Survey. And so the primary uses are farming, ranching, forestry, investment, recreation, and residential. I believe there's an other category too, but you don't need to report that. And we just want the average size of each of these categories. So this is well set up for a pivot table. You can see gross acres is a variable in the hint here. It's a variable that summarizes the total of acres owned and or managed by the respondent. So this would include land that they have the title to, that they own, as well as land that perhaps they have a permit to operate on, maybe from the federal or state government, or that they lease or otherwise rent. And prime use is the self-reported primary use of the respondent's land, and so we'll look for that in the data. So let's just jump back. So before we get into COUNTIF and COUNTIFs, let's start with just a quick recap on pivot tables. So first thing we got to do is select the data. So we're already at the bottom of the data set. So on my PC, I'm just going to hit Control and Shift and the up arrow, which takes me to the top of the data set, and the right arrow, which takes me all the way over to the right there. So you can see we've highlighted the entire data set. You can go to Insert, Pivot Tables. There you can see our range goes from A1 to DX14, 814, and we're going to put it in a new sheet. We've added our pivot table. Now remember, prime use was the unique category, so that's set up for rows. So we can put that in here. There's our prime use. You can see it goes 1 through 7, and there's a period there for missing data. And then we wanted gross acres, I think was what the hint told us. So there's our gross acres. We can put that in values. And you can see we can get rid of number 7 because we don't need to report that, as well as the missing data. Hit OK. So that was just clicking on the row labels, the little drop down menu there. And right now our data is in the count, so this is telling us the number of each type. So 1 is farmers, so there are 60 farmers that have reported their gross acres in the data set. So we don't want the count, though, we want the average size. So if we 2-finger click on my trackpad on my PC, or right click on your mouse on the count of gross acres, you'll see this drop down menu pop up. We can go to Summarize and hit Average, and that'll give us the average in acres of the amount of land that each owner type or each prime use type owns and manages. I'm not going to click the average here, I'll let you do that. And you can remember as well that you can change, you can type in so you don't have to remember what each prime use code is. So farming was number 1, forestry, ranching, etc. So that's just a quick recap on using pivot tables. You'll want to not report the count, but actually the average acres. Then we can go to question number 2. We'll just jump back real quick to our data set. And Shift or Control left arrow brought me back to the beginning of the bottom of the data set there. Now let's go back to the assignment. You can see for question number 2, we want to know for each of these primary uses, what is the objective they have? Which objective is the most important, or do most respondents report as very or extremely important? So the objectives are here, starting in row or column S. And so let's just go over. You can see there's a whole bunch of them. I've surrounded them in the box here. I've created a space to calculate our data. So there's 18 different objectives, row S through, or column S through column AJ. And if we go back to the metadata, you can see here's our 18 objectives. And it ranges from providing a home for me and my family, timber production, crop production, livestock production, etc., all the way on down to providing income. And I've just recorded each of our unique prime use codes here and just described them next to it. So farming, forestry, ranching, investment. So 1 is farming, 2 is forestry, 3 is ranching, and so forth and so on. I've already calculated the percent of farmers who think that, or who believe that providing a home or family, or reported that providing a home for their family on their land was very or extremely important. You can see that's 75%. And I've done that here using a mix of a count ifs formula in the first highlight here, and then the divided by, that mathematical operator, and then a second formula, count if. So what this is doing, if you remember back to the PowerPoint and lecture, is that first we're counting the number of farmers who reported that the objective was very or extremely important. Then we're dividing by the total number of farmers. So you can see if we hit return, that'll give us our 75%. Just a little walkthrough of the formulas. Count ifs starts with a criteria range for the first criteria, and then it inserts the first criteria, then the criteria range for the second criteria, and then the second criteria, and so on and so forth. We only have 2 criteria for this one. The first is that the respondent is a farmer, so we're going to use column R, 2 through 814, equals R816, which is 1. So basically we want to know how many people in cells R2 through R814 reported a 1. And then the second criteria we want is for objective 1, that's column S, 2 through 814. How many of those in column S, how many greater than 2s do we have? So very or extremely important. So if you combine those 2 criteria together, we're talking about how many farmers are there that reported that objective 1 was very or extremely important. And then we're going to divide by here. The criteria range is R2 through 814. That's again our prime uses. And the criteria here again is 1, or R816. So it's basically back to how many farmers do we have. So count the number of farmers who report objective 1 is extremely or very important. Divide that by the number of farmers, and that gives us our percent. Now you may have noticed in the formula here we've got a bunch of dollar signs in here. Remember, as we talked about in class, those dollar signs are anchors. They anchor the formula to certain places in the data set, so that as you copy and paste or drag the formula somewhere else, those parts of the formula don't update. So you can see the first thing is we've anchored the column and the row number for our criteria range 1. And what that's doing is it's locking our criteria for our first criteria to this part of the data, column R, 2 through 814, so that we always want to refer back to that to the prime use for that first criteria. We've locked the column number on the criteria itself, so we always want to, no matter where we move this formula, we always want it to refer back to column R. But we haven't locked the row number because we want it to be able to update as we copy and paste. Say we copy the formula from here to the next cell down, we want it to update the criteria so that it's reporting number 2 rather than number 1. We've locked here again the rows for 2 and through 814 for the objective, right? Because we want it to make sure that as we copy and paste this formula down into the cells that I'm highlighting with my cursor right now, that they still refer to rows 2 through 814. But we didn't lock the column numbers because as we go to the right here, as we drag our formula to the right, we want it to update the objectives so that as we drag over one column into column T, that the objective updates to the objective values in column T as well. And then the same back here with our count of the number of those prime uses. So the nice thing about this is it allows us to take this and we can copy it. And we can paste it. And you see we've updated the data, or we could drag it right there. And let's just get rid of that formatting. And there we go. Now you can see we still have our correct ranges here, 2 through 814. We've updated the criteria here to residential owners for this last cell. Now if we highlight all this, we can use the fill handle and drag it to the right, and that's going to update for each of these. And now your goal is to look through all that data and figure out which objective is most important to each landowner type. And that's basically the tool that we'll use for the rest of this assignment, is using the COUNTIF and COUNTIFs tool. The nice thing now that we've highlighted, or that we've created this formula, we can copy and paste it elsewhere in the data set. So if we go back to the assignment, you can see the next 2B asks about the landowner type. So it wants to know which landowner type has the smallest proportion of landowners that believe practicing conservation is just the right thing to do, and which is the greatest proportion that believe that practicing conservation has to pencil out. So first we have to find those, so we can go to the lookup table, or to the metadata, I mean. And if we scroll down here, you can see practicing conservation is the right thing to do, and it has to pencil out, and that's lookup table 7. So lookup table 7 is here. So it's agree to disagree. So we just want those people who are 1 or 2, those that believe or agree with these statements, and we're going to find the greatest and the smallest proportion. And so we can go back to our data. So those were, let me just see, that was cons 1 and cons 2. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go over and find cons 1 and cons 2. Here we are, paste it in. Now it says 0%. Now if you remember, the criteria here is greater than 2, right? So we're looking for the number of values here that are greater than 2. But if we remind ourselves in the lookup table, there's nothing greater than 2 here, so we have to change it. What we want are those people who agree. So we're going to do greater than 0. So we just need to update that. From greater than 2 to greater than 0. And so what this is telling us is that 87% of farmers believe or agree with the statement of cons 1, and 89% of foresters agree with that statement. So just as a reminder, cons 1 is practicing conservation is just the right thing to do, and you're going to look for which landowner type has the smallest proportion there. And then in the second, let's copy that, we can put it in cons 2. And in the second case here, you're going to look for, this is conservation just has to pencil out. So which has the greatest proportion that believes that conservation has to pencil out. And that's number 2. Number 3 is going to take each of these attitude statements and figure out which percent of all landowners, so now not by landowner type, but of all landowners, which percent are positive, neutral, and negative on these statements. And so if we go back to our metadata, let's just find those statements. Here's those attitude statements. We're going to use lookup table 8. And so if we look at lookup table 8, you can see the positives are 3, 2, and 1. The negatives are -1, -2, and -3. And neutral is 0. So we just need to update our criteria to code for, we either want it to be greater than 0, less than 0, or equal to 0. So we can copy here, paste it here. Now we know that this is greater than 0. Right? So, but here we have all land, or we have just farmers, and we want to get all landowners. So the first thing we can do is we don't need the count if statement, because we're going to get rid of that criteria for which type of landowner it is, which means we can get rid of the count if of farmers. And see, that's a percentage, so let's change that back to a number. So 565 respondents said they were positive about this statement. And so what we need to do now is figure out how many people actually answered this statement. Is it 565 out of 813 or some lesser number? So one of the things we can do is say equals, we can count the missing data. So we can do count if. Highlight that whole, so I just went shift control up. That took me to the top, and then I let go of the shift and I went down one so that I wasn't counting row 1. So that's that, comma. Let's count the number of periods. That's our denotation for missing data. And there are 74 missing data, so we'll go equals 813 minus 74. So we have 739 responses. We can now do simple division. 565 divided by 739. 76% of respondents were positive about the first attitude statement here, that typically conservation programs resulted in changes to fish and wildlife habitat that are positive. Now we just need to find neutral and negative, and we can do that again just by updating the criteria. Get rid of that greater than, make it 0. That's going to be our neutral, 12%. And then we can do less than 0 to find those people who are negative, and that's 11%. So then we just need to do that for each of the attitudes. We can use these same tools for question number 4 and for question number 5. So that's it. I hope that helps, and you feel free to let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.